Namaste everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host kushalmehra. All right, आज मेरे साथ podcast पे है प्रखर गुप्ता. क्या हाल है भाई?
बिल्कुल बढ़िया है। पर एक बात बताओ, आपने गाना क्यों नहीं खत्म होने दिया? इतना अच्छा
ग-
गाना था जो
नहीं
इंट्रो
नहीं,
सॉन्ग है।
अरे तो 30 सेकंड के क्या मतलब, क्या 4 मिनट तक मैं इंट्रो ही करते रहो? लोग बोलेंगे भाई पॉडकास्ट पे आए हो कि गाना सुनने आए हो?
मैं पता है, मैंने जब छोटा होता था तो व्हेन आई वुड वेक अप स्कूल के लिए, मम्मी ना जगजीत सिंह का हरे कृष्णा हरे रामा चलाती थी।
हाँ.
इसमें पीछे सितार बज रहा होता है। तो
हम्म.
अब ना मेरी आदत पड़ गई है, सुबह उठते अगर जब मैं सितार सुनता हूँ ना, एक अलग ही माहौल बन जाता है। आज भी सुबह
हाँ.
उठ के मैं हरे कृष्णा हरे रामा, मजा आ जाता है, फुल
मगर
पावर।
जगजीत सिंह के है ना, मैं एक बात बोलूं, आई थिंक ही हैज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट मैजिकल वॉइसेस इन इन आवर कंट्री एंड आवर कल्चर. जगजीत सिंह के है ना, कभी वो आपने पता नहीं वो वाला सुना उनका भजन, हे
सब
राम हे
हे राम,
राम,
बिल्कुल
बढ़िया,
सुना है।
बहुत बढ़िया है वो. और ऐसे ही जगजीत सिंह की गुरबाणी भी उतनी अच्छी है, और ऐसे ही जगजीत सिंह के बाकी देवी देवताओं के भी गाने बहुत अच्छे हैं. तो अगर सुनना है भजन सुबह उठ के, क्योंकि मैं भी कभी कभी सुनता हूँ. अभी लोग बोलेंगे नास्तिक भजन सुनता क्यों भाई, अलाउड नहीं है क्या सुनने को? सुनता हूँ, मगर मजा आता है जगजीत सिंह की आवाज में सुनने को. अच्छा, मगर अज्यूमिंग कि क्योंकि पहली बार आए हो पॉडकास्ट पे, सो यू कम फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, because never go with the assumption that everybody knows you.
Acha, I do the opposite. I assume I walk into a room thinking most people will have an idea, but I'll give you a little bit about myself. Hi chat, जितने लोग मेरे को जानते हैं, share भी कर दो chat में. My name is Prakhar Gupta. I'm a recent graduate from Columbia University. I finished my education in economics and psychology. I also happen to be a company secretary, partly why I have a fair understanding of the law. I attempted to do my chartered accountancy. I was never interested and I quit somewhere close to the end. But besides that, I've been on YouTube over the last 2 years talking about things that range from some form of philosophy to some form of psychology to some form of spirituality. I pride in the fact that at least some of those things are fairly independently minded. Um, and I've been the center of attention of things I do not want to be the center of attention of. So I am actually, I must say, this is the most pressured I've felt while appearing on any podcast. मैंने टेड टॉक वगैरह दुनिया भर के कर लिए, कोई प्रेशर नहीं होता. यहाँ पे आने से पहले हम लोग, अरे मैं क्या बोलूंगा, मेरे को पता ही नहीं है. तो इफ आई एम स्टूपिड टुडे, फॉरगिव मी, ओके गाइस. हाँ.
हाँ, so ऐसा है कि I just want to clarify why we are chatting today before people come up with ideas. The idea of Prakhar and I having a discussion has been going on for a long time. We were just not able to follow into a date, and then I was in North America. मैं इस समय कनाडा में बैठा हूँ, and the timing is just matching. इसके लिए भी सवेरे है, मेरे लिए भी सवेरे है. So I was like, काम करते हैं, अभी सवेरे है, chat कर लेते हैं.
चैट कर
And
लेते
then
हैं.
and so Prakhar वाला ठीक है भाई, अभी बात कर लेते हैं, and very soon I will be meeting Prakhar hopefully in a few days, and then उसके साथ वहां पे भी बात होगी. So
डेट कास्ट विद कुशल मेहरा कमिंग
yes,
सून.
वो भी होगी. So एडवांस में सुन लो, वो भी होने वाला है. So Prakhar, obviously today's topic is what why did I call this the contours of nationalism and patriotism? Maybe I will lay it down for everyone, because this is going to be a freewheeling chat. Normally क्या होता है, चार वक्त पे लोग आते हैं, वो जो एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं एकदम टेक्निकल पॉइंट बाय पॉइंट बोलना. नहीं, this is today we are trying to understand what nationalism and patriotism means to different people. Now I'll start with myself. And I have never hidden the fact that I am not a nationalist or a patriot. I say this all the time on the podcast, and the listeners, viewers, whatever you want to call them, they know I'm not one. I am what I like to call myself is a civilizationalist. And my civilizationalism sometimes is not just India centric. My civilizationalism is beyond India, and my civilizationalism is based on um, certain principles and ideas that are primarily derived out of Dharma, but also are influenced by other civilizations also. I'm not a globalist. I understand territorial integrity, and I will always stand up for the territorial integrity of India. In fact, I'm very hawkish on that. So while on one side I have a very libertarian streak, but on national security, I'm a hawk. Like, I'm a hawk, which people might find uncomfortable to at times. But why I wanted to discuss nationalism and patriotism is that there is a lot of debate in India on what it means to be a nationalist and a patriot. And sometimes in the West, जैसे the West में the word nationalist has a very bad name. मतलब nationalist बोल दो तो उनको वो सिर्फ वो हिटलर आए करके वो वही नजर आता है उनको. एंड यहाँ पे पेट्रियट बोला जाता है. तो अगर हम इंडियंस हैं और इंडिया में एवरी थर्ड पर्सन विल ड्रॉप द वर्ड, इनफैक्ट आप ट्विटर बायो देखना, ट्विटर बायो में स्टॉन्च नेशनलिस्ट लिखा होता है लोगों ने। तो इमेजिन करो, एक एक अभी हम ग्लोबल वर्ल्ड में रहते हैं, इनफैक्ट दो लोग जो इस समय स्क्रीन पे बैठ के बात कर रहे हैं, दोनों बाहर है इंडिया के, और वो इंडिया के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, हम दोनों
Right.
इंडिया के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं। और हमारे, स्पेशली मेरे केस में, एक ओवरवेलमिंग नंबर ऑफ लोग जिनके अगर ट्विटर बायोस या फेसबुक बायोस में जाओगे लिखा होगा स्टॉन्च नेशनलिस्ट। सो नाउ व्हेन यू हियर द वर्ड नेशनलिज्म एंड पेट्रियटिज्म, और मैं कोई एकेडमिक डिस्कोर्स की बात नहीं कर रहा हूं, तुम्हारे लिए व्हाट डज इट मीन टू बी अ नेशनलिस्ट एंड अ पेट्रियट?
Okay. Do you want me to start here or do you want me to start where I want to start?
Wherever you want to start.
Okay. So I think you said something very interesting a little bit earlier, which is मैं नास्तिक होके कैसे भजन एंजॉय कर सकता हूँ, राइट? द फैक्ट दैट पीपल माइट हैव दैट कमेंट्री कि अगर आपका लिटरल इनपुट ऑफ डिविनिटी आपके दिमाग में नहीं है, then how can you conjure the idea that listening to bhajans is in any way divine to you? And I think for those people, I don't want to use the word secular. What I want to use is a form of art that is hollow of divinity inherently. अगर मैं इंट्रिंसिकली भगवान में से अपना विश्वास हटा दूं, तो क्या भजन मेरे लिए किसी भी सेंस में एक ट्रांसेंडेंटल फीलिंग प्रोड्यूस कर सकते हैं? इन द सेम वे, अगर मैं नेशनलिज्म में से जो प्रेजेंट डे कॉन्टूर्स हैं नेशनलिज्म के वो हटा दूं, तो क्या वो टेरिटोरियल इंटेग्रिटी, क्या वो हिस्ट्री, क्या वो सिविलाइजेशन मेरे लिए किसी भी टाइप की लॉयल्टी क्रिएट कर सकती है? एंड व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू गेट टू हियर इज प्रोबेबली सिमिलर इन योर केस एज इन माइन. I hate being told what I must do. Like I legitimately, I'm not going to play by your rules. I will, maybe I come to the idea and I play by your rules by myself, but I will evaluate the situation independently. Khud se. I'm not going to surrender to the crowds very easily. That is how I think about stuff in my private life. So when I think of nationalism and patriotism, although I might have a little bit of a confusion as to how to separate those two also, because they sound so similar in application, I think of it as, what are my terms? What does the nation mean to me? And I keep bumping across this obstacle. Kushal bhai, help me resolve this. For me, nationalism, or what is it that fills the vessel of nationalism, is stuff that I've learned in the history of myself. जो मेरा एक्सपीरियंस है, which is surrounded by say people in Faridabad in Delhi, which is where I lived, right? जो उनकी histories थी जिससे उन्होंने मेरे को कुछ दिया. So I find myself being more community oriented and more history oriented, personal history oriented in my nationalism and patriotism, as opposed to what is commonly understood as nationalism and patriotism. The second thing which you pointed very nicely is Twitter bio में किसी के staunch nationalist, staunch nationalist ये सब लिखा होना. एंड वेरी ऑफ्टन, यू नो व्हाट इज वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग इज, मेरी ऑडियंस के साथ भी ये होता है, और मेरी ऑडियंस तो बच्चे हैं. My audience is 18, 19, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, 24-year-olds. And it makes me wonder, why is it that a 22, 23-year-old needs the crutch of nationalism to establish identity? And my fear with that is, I'm not sure, my fear with that is because the economic prospects, which is the adventure in the capitalist world outside, they're dwindling so massively, we need cultural artifacts to hold ourselves stable and sane. And that makes me wonder whether this entire guise of nationalism that has erupted in India over the last so many years is some sort of a cover up for compliance, right? And this is just my guesswork. I'm too young and too far away to know what is really up. But it is primarily because of that जो हमारी contemporary usage of nationalism and patriotism है, doesn't jive with me. मेरी उसके साथ बनती नहीं है. मैं अपने हिसाब से डिफाइन करता हूँ वो. अब बताओ इसमें क्या गलती है, क्या सही है?
नहीं देख, ऐसा है कि when it comes, so it's very important to explain to viewers that nationalism and patriotism in a Western context. So what are the different kinds of nationalisms in the West? So there is civic nationalism. Now civic nationalism is a very uniquely American concept, or Canadian भी बोल सकते हैं kind of. Now why? Because America was a multicultural society where no one particular race or ethnicity is going to be havi. So they came up with civic nationalism, where basically your attachment is to the constitution, and you derive your nationalistic tendencies from the values that are imbibed in the constitution. Now civic nationalism nowadays has more dwarfed into patriotism. I don't know, it's all very confusing.
Just one
कोई
second.
नहीं, कोई बात नहीं. till I'll explain till then. Now we तब तक चलो, जब तक प्रखर आता है हम दूसरा काम करते हैं. हाँ, आ गया.
Sorry, मेरे फोन का अलार्म बज गया था.
Oh, no problem, no
Go
problem.
on, please.
So okay, so now we're talking about, like I was saying, ki civic nationalism kind of goes into patriotism somewhere in the West. Now, in Europe, nationalism has a very different connotation. Europe, where nationalism was very ethnocentric and very race centric or linguistic centric or identity centric. And that's where, you have the German issue, जो nationalist socialist थे,
Right.
nazis, वो सब और बहुत सारे issues है. और इसके लिए nationalism has a very uniquely bad connotation in the West. Now, when we are looking at nationalism or patriotism in the Indian context, the biggest mistake that I find that is happening across the world in the global discourse is, again, I coined this word called Abrahamic privilege. Is because the world is privileged and world is looked at from a Abrahamic lens. इन्होंने last 1000 साल 1500 साल में ना इन्होंने एक बड़े तबके के ऊपर राज किया है दुनिया के, not only physically, even epistemically. एपिस्टेमिक राज बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट होता है. आपका फिजिकल राज तो होता ही है, एक बार फिजिकल राज तो चले जाता है, ठीक है. अंग्रेज चले गए 1947 में, चले गए,
राइट,
मगर अंग्रेजियत नहीं गई. और मुझे अंग्रेजी भाषा से कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. आई कंडक्ट दिस पॉडकास्ट बेसिकली इन इंग्लिश, बट व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू से इज एपिस्टेमिक जो रूल होता है ना, not that every Western idea is bad. I like many Western ideas, but the point is, like you said, I choose it on my terms. But there is this epistemic, heavy overbearing pressure on India. So what that average kid on Twitter in India or on Facebook that says, I'm a staunch nationalist, basically what it means is they want the territorial integrity of India to be intact. See, they may not be able to express what they want. Sometimes, they're just young kids, 18, 20, 21-year-old kids. What they're looking at is, I want the territorial integrity of India to be intact. I think my country is a force of good, and I don't like it when you insult my countries, right?
Even casually, which is where most of the hurt is delivered, in insulting the nation and the right.
But that is your majority crowd. But there is also this crowd in India that has now come up with this very aggressive, I don't know what to say,
my way or the highway nationalism.
Yeah, very, very, very off-putting kind of nationalism. And where I think eventually, even in India now, we'll have to, maybe the nationalist number one that I called, maybe they are now the patriots of India. They love India and the culture. And I guess the nationalist in India now is going to become this robust, I'm not sure. I'm saying eventually we'll have to classify, because not every nationalist on social media is as jingoistic and as, overbearing and what do you want to say, wants to turn off a young child who's looking at their surroundings. Not everyone is going to be like that. So I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I think nationalism and patriotism in India is different from how it's pursued in the West. The nationalism and patriotism in India comes from a very unique experience that we've had as a civilization, where we've had a journey of two major invasions in India, and our nationalism and patriotism stems from a historical perspective that is ours, and that is not a European or an American perspective. So when the American or the European tries to superimpose that understanding on us, it should be problem. And similarly, when a local Indian tries to impose their Jingoism on us, that also should be equally problematic.
Agreed. In fact, I would even say question their Jingoism. Like, so here is my thing, okay? This is not, these local jingoistic tendencies are not limited to specific echo chambers that a regular person does not interact with. More likely than not, a liberal 25-year-old, say somebody like me who believes in जो आज से 10 साल पहले dominant political ideology थी, their parents have those WhatsApp forwards that they then echo in their privacies, which have those strains of nationalism, patriotism, whatever you might want to call them. And adding to the list of things that you said that a regular nationalist in India sort of wants, one of the other things is an acknowledgement of the depth of our cultural history, right? That, well, we have a default inferiority complex. We've not been able to rid ourselves for the last 75 years since we got independent and such. And like now it is some sort of an awakening, a renaissance. I often think of it internally in my head as a cultural renaissance that we are demanding at this point. Now, going back to the strains of patriotism on WhatsApp, more likely than not, and I do not want to say always here, but more likely than not, they refer to India in its historical form. And that should give away something when it comes to the philosophical analysis of India as a concept in this patriotic, nationalistic domain. Why do I have to be proud of something that no longer exists? My difference with the nationalists begin there. I'm happy to be a nationalist. I'm happy to scream the name of India, which I do, by the way. People have seen that. I'm happy to scream the name of India, the languages of India. I'm happy to sing the national anthem. But let's make something that we are proud of first. Right? And so what that does is this need to sort of represent myself again, where I've been marginalized and sidelined by some invisible force for the last 75 years, all the while that I've been awake. And what is the word for it? Self-identified. All this while that I've been me, I've been by default inferiorized. What happens is that either I'm compensating with very small increments. You know, जो वो master stroke वाली tendency है, ये तो master stroke ही होगा कोई. It is coming from a place where I want something tangible to be proud of in the now. Or I keep referring to the ambiguous past. और उस ambiguous past की reference में सबसे key feature क्या है? The marriage of धार्मिक civilizational texts with modern science. कभी कभी super forceful. अरे ये तो हमारे like, and my fear is that this is exactly what will demotivate us from doing something tangibly good, from doing something tangibly better in the time to come. Like, let us be realistic about our sentiment. I'm all for the sentiment, but let us start now instead of starting in the past. And for that to happen, all the identity and all the opportunity must flood in the economic domain before it comes to the cultural domain. Mm-hmm. That is my limited. So like, give me an economic, give me space to create the next big like social tech startup in India. Give me space to create infrastructure like the world's never seen. We've seen enough countless times where countries have gone down and they've risen back up to surprise the world. European, not European, all those countries. Right? Let us do that. And once we have done that, हम लोग rightfully खड़े हो सकते हैं यार. और ऐसा नहीं है कि अभी तक rightfully खड़े होने का stage नहीं है. कई चीजों में है. But we have to be precise with what we pick. We cannot be picking whatever and then representing it however, just because nobody's out checking it. I think it is our job to be disciplined in our claims. Nobody else, not the outside world, should be telling us, "Arey, ye to dekho, inhone aise hi jod diya." No, no, no. You clean your house. You come with the perfect evidence and the perfect argument. Then there is no place to look around and turn over your shoulder and see who's watching you. Then that cannot happen. So does that make sense? Am I making sense or am I too abstract?
No. So I'll try and explain why history is important. Is history is the building block on which we learn from our mistakes. So history is very important.
Agreed.
You have to learn history. But what happens is, and I say this all the time, and this is where the jingoistic bit of Indian nationalists come. People with a shitty present always think about the glorious past. Always remember this. Our present is what our present is. We are a poor nation, relatively poor to the rich nations. We are very poor in comparison to that. In such a situation, we have people who also want to feel good about themselves. So how will they feel good about themselves? They will feel good about themselves, which I call the golden age syndrome. I actually did a monologue on that. I call it the golden age syndrome because, you know, there was a golden age. हमने golden age में ऐसे किया था, ऐसे किया था, ऐसे किया था, ऐसे किया था. And when that golden age syndrome becomes on steroids, is when you get examples like that. What you're saying is सब चीजें हमारे पास थी. You know, everything is वो. मगर obviously that is a straw man because that is a very small subset of the population. Most people are balanced and understand what I'm saying. But I'm trying to break down what you are facing. And it's good you're expressing yourself because I can give words to what you're expressing in my own way too. And this is a classic problem where while we have an inferiority complex, we also are supremacists. I don't understand that. Because to hide our inferiority complex, we use supremacism.
We go classically the opposite direction total.
So, right, because that supremacism stems from hiding our inferiority. There are tangible things to be proud of India's past. I think Indian philosophy is something that has given so many things to the world. People don't. I keep pinning this book, plugging this book every time. The book is the Shape of Ancient Thought, written by Thomas Machiavelli. It is a gigantic 1,000-page book which shows how Greek philosophy was influenced by Indian philosophy, and the meeting point of the Greeks and the Indians was Persia, Iran. So Persian king के कोर्ट में ये सब लोग आते थे, और यहाँ पे इंडियंस अपनी फिलॉसफी बोलते थे, ग्रीक्स अपनी बातें करते थे, और कैसे ये एक दूसरे को इन्फ्लुएंस करते थे. इंडियंस ग्रीक से लेते थे, ग्रीक्स इंडियंस से लेते थे. और ग्रीक मोनिज्म, इलियाटिक मोनिज्म इज लिटरली फ्रॉम द उपनिषद्स. वो ट्रेस हो सकता है कि कैसे गया यहां से पर्शिया, इंडिया से, वहां ग्रीक्स ने लिया, ग्रीक्स ने उसको अपना बनाया और अपने नए तरीके से किया. सो देयर आर मेनी थिंग्स दैट इंडिया जेन्युइनली केम अप विथ, like the principle of non-duality and many other things that that the West talks about today. There are great practices like yoga nidra or vipassana, and there when an Indian says, मैं तेरे को है ना इंसिडेंट बताता हूँ. रिसेंटली ये जो रोगन की पॉडकास्ट पे ये बंदा आया था, मैं तेरे को नाम बताता हूँ. एंड व्हेन आई वाज लिसनिंग टू दैट जेंटलमैन, देखो वो आदमी बहुत अच्छा था, मैं सच बता रहा हूँ, वो आदमी बहुत अच्छा था. ये है एंड्रू ह्यूबरमैन की पॉडकास्ट.
अच्छा.
He is a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford University, and he is the host of the Huberman Lab.
Yes.
ठीक है जी. बंदे ने एक काम अच्छा किया, उसने वर्ड योग निद्रा बार बार यूज किया. He used the word yoga nidra in the podcast. I think this is around after 2 hours at the latter half of the podcast of Rogan. But he says I have to call it something else because people will think it is woo. That's where I have a problem. See, यहाँ पे अगर कोई इंडियन ऑब्जेक्ट करता है, वेस्टर्नर क्या करता है? He must be हिंदुत्वा, he must be upper casteist, he must be this, he must be that. No, that is not jingoism. Demanding you acknowledge the source and call it what it is not jingoism. What is jingoism is everything is Indian. सब कुछ इंडिया ने बनाया है. इंडिया के अलावा और किसी ने कुछ कंट्रीब्यूट ही नहीं किया है धरती को. हम नहीं होते तो दुनिया को पार्टी करना भी नहीं आता. ये जो बात है ना,
राइट,
ये जिंगोइज्म है, वो जिंगोइज्म नहीं है. और ये जो एक अपोलोजिया हमारे अंदर आ गया है कि कई बार हमारे गुरुज जो वेस्ट में जाते हैं, वो ऐसी अननेसेसरी लाइंस बोल देते हैं, योगा इज नॉट हिंदू. तो योगा हिंदू नहीं है तो क्या है?
हाँ, मैंने सुना था ये रिसेंटली, किसी ने बोला था. एंड इट्स लाइक, और क्या है फिर वो? मतलब और तुमने फिर कुछ छोड़ा ही नहीं. हाँ,
योगा हिंदू नहीं है, योग निद्रा हिंदू नहीं है, विपश्यना बुद्धिस्ट नहीं है.
हाँ. ये
वो नहीं है, वो ये नहीं है, तो फिर रह क्या गया? फिर हम लोग क्या है? हम सिर्फ कास्ट हिंदू है, करी हिंदू है और काव हिंदू है, बाकी कुछ नहीं है. हर पॉजिटिव स्टीरियोटाइप, एवरी पॉजिटिव स्टीरियोटाइप दैट इज आउट ऑफ इंडिया, every positive stereotype that is out of India
has to be globalized
and secularized.
Right.
Because you can't have a bloody pagan idea in your Abrahamic world. Yeah, oh my God, we are doing pagan things. We will go to hell. And let me tell you, it is their Abrahamic problem that they cannot handle a pagan idea. That's their problem. That's their psychosis that they can't handle it. हमको कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता. हमको कल अगर कोई बोल देगा इस्लाम और क्रिश्चियनिटी में कोई आइडिया है जो अच्छा है और वो करने से तुम्हारा फायदा होगा, या सेक्युलर आइडिया है जो करने से तुम्हारा फायदा होगा,
हम तो नहीं
बोलेंगे
छोड़
ला.
हाँ,
हम तो
अभी दे. और क्या?
बिल्कुल. यहाँ पे ये फर्क है. इसके लिए मैं बोल रहा हूँ, इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट व्हेन वी डिस्कस द कॉन्टूर्स ऑफ नेशनलिज्म एंड पेट्रियटिज्म, वी शुड नॉट इंसल्ट the genuine nationalist, the genuine patriot, the genuine civilizationalist who just wants even playing field. They just want mutual respect. They want their source to be credited.
Right.
But what I am mocking and what I know you are trying to say is this person who says every damn thing that has come is Indian, and that person who has such a profound inferiority complex.
Right.
And when I say inferiority, this is an inferiority complex ultra pro max level.
Right. Masquerading as like infinite superiority.
And then you try to submit people this very far machismo laden model which is trying to suppress you, where I'll say it openly, I've said it before, I don't like this idea that in Maharashtra before every movie they play the national anthem. I think they're demeaning the national anthem that way. Now they say it is preaching sentiments of national. If By the way, some of my friends have given me good arguments of playing the national anthem in the cinema too, but they are not out of jingoism and patriotism. And I understand those arguments. But I personally feel, why do you need to play the national anthem in the cinema hall? And then
Right.
what happens is there will be that one moron who will not stand up. And then everybody will go and like tapli marna shuru kar doge usko. Don't do all of that. The point is, we should not be having these, tests of बता तू कितना nationalistic है on a scale of 1 to 10. बता तू क्या है, बता तू ऐसा है, बता तू वैसा है. That bothers me, and I feel it turns off a lot of our urban kids. I don't know. That's my sentiment.
Well, okay. Couple of things. एक तो आपने बोला कि we should not be turning away the genuine nationalist, and I am 100% with that. मेरी instinct होती है that I often talk about the adjustment part as opposed to the anchor part, right? The anchor I agree with, but there is one more thing I wanted to add to that. In my experience of living in New York, which I think is a globalist city, barely an American city in its way, right? And meeting people from legitimately all across the world. Like there is countries I'd never heard existed. And I'm fairly well read that I've met people from. Everybody has a national myth that talks about their golden age in the same way. The most obvious example is Iran, which is Persia, right? Iranians and Persia feel like they were the kings at one point, and they are fighting this war to reclaim their lost glory. And that is exactly what I mean is a danger with this kind of a narrative, is that we get hyper focused on the past. Somebody was pointing to it. Why can we not be proud of our past and continue in the future? Because if you keep your past front and center, how different can the future be from the past? And where did the past go? Like one of the other things, and this might be offensive to a lot of people, but this is a purely philosophical idea. A system is only as good as the outcome it produces. What was the outcome that it produced back in the day? Infighting. What did that do? It helped the invaders, right? You have to be careful in formulating your future with respect to the past so that you actually improve upon it, so that you actually become more robust, more anti-fragile, not carry the same fragilities into the future. That's one thing. The other thing about this national anthem issue, I never delved into it, partly because I was never in India, so I might be a little off on some of the technical points, but here is my thing. Does the national anthem also play before Indian cricket team plays a cricket match? Because I think it is way more appropriate there.
It does play.
Achha.
See, I have no issues when it's playing. It is Team India. You're playing the national anthem. I get it. But other than that, let me put it this way. If Mumbai Indians are playing Bangalore, now I don't understand the need of a national anthem. I'm being very clear. टीम इंडिया प्ले कर रही है, खेलो. मैं पिक्चर देखने जा रहा हूँ, उसके पहले नेशनल एंथम बजाने का क्या मतलब है, मुझे नहीं समझ पड़ता.
Right. नहीं, like also here is one more thing. ठीक है. The difference, I was with some of my American friends in India once very long ago, 2018, 2019, before COVID. We were traveling and we were in Sikkim, okay? And not just like Gangtok, Sikkim. We were going to North Sikkim, where you have to get permissions for people to go to, agar aap Indian nahi ho, right? So we are at this police station getting permission for my American friends, and then, whatever, traveling. And we see in very quick succession, there is animals on the street. There is a temple and the processions on the street. There is a mosque and the people are on, like, my friend remarked instantly, she's like, in India, everything's on the street. And that made me begin to wonder about the difference between the public and the private in India. A lot of our identity questions, our identity representations are always public. One of the other symptoms of this phenomena is that the fundamental unit of legal analysis before modern constitution is imposed on India is the Hindu undivided family. As if that is one unit. As if the collective choice making is going to be singular from there. Right? And what that sort of points to is that the public-private in India is a very non-concept in that way. Like as a kid growing up, even inside the privacies of my own bedroom, it was never truly private. Anybody could walk in anytime. And I'm just pointing at very bare minimum threshold examples of how the public and the private sort of interact in India. And it is partly because there is space for this confusion between the public and the private that an idea like the national anthem before a movie is so widely accepted also in India. If they try to do it somewhere here, these people are going to be like, are you out of your mind? Before a movie, you're going to play the national anthem. Like, are you really going to do that? We are not going to watch movies because these guys get fiercely independent. For them, the myth or the fundamental unit of analysis is the individual. And therefore, the disagreement is possible. Now, with the undivided family, the disagreement's already sidelined for the sake of harmony. Very similar to what also China propagates in its own way. But that is somewhat of a non-cohesive analysis of the situation. Does that make sense?
So let me take this a little further, and maybe this might hurt the sentiments. Not that I'm endorsing it in any way. I think it is uncalled for even when it is done in America, by the way. But let us use 2-3 examples in America. Colin Kaepernick kneeled to the national anthem of the United States of America to register his protest against the murder of African Americans by cops, right? This is not a judgment on the validity of Colin Kaepernick on his or on him as a public intellectual. I am indifferent to Colin Kaepernick. But what I'm saying is that Colin Kaepernick could bow down to the national anthem, like kneel, right? America में kneeling is considered as a protest, right? India में होएगा, अरे वाह झुक रहा है, बहुत अच्छी बात है. मगर यहाँ पे उसको प्रोटेस्ट माना जाता है, ठीक है. दूसरा, अमेरिका में आप अपने झंडे को जला सकते हो. यू कैन बर्न योर फ्लैग एज पर अमेरिकन लॉ. इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि हर कोने में अमेरिकन जाके चलो झंडा जलाएं कर रहे हैं. दे लाइक देयर कंट्री अ लॉट एंड दे डोंट बर्न द फ्लैग, बट देयर आर मेनी इंस्टेंसेस वेयर अमेरिकन्स हैव बर्न्ड द फ्लैग टू प्रोटेस्ट or register their protest. They are not jailed for that. American patriotism is built at a very self-confident level. And American patriotism, you rightfully said, starts at the individual and then goes to the collective. The patriotism tells you you are an individual unit first. Yeah, you know, I have always found this to be because American patriotism is civic nationalism or civic. It stems from the constitution that was built on the robust principle of individualism. Now, I'll tell you very interesting. We are very, very open-minded as a society in India when it comes to spirituality. We are fierce individualists in our spiritual realm. वहां पे आई नो 295A के अभी सब हो रहे हैं, वो ठीक है, एक रिएक्शनरी फेज है इंडिया का, मगर एज अ सोसाइटी हम बहुत we have taken, let me be very honest, Hindus have taken a lot of shit about their faith, unlike other faiths in India. Let me be very honest about it. Hindus में बड़ा गूदा है. हिंदुओं में उन्होंने अपने फेथ के बारे में बहुत नॉनसेंस सुनी हुई है. बट अमेरिका में है ना, स्पिरिचुअल लेवल में वो कैपेसिटी नहीं है. मैं नहीं बोल रहा हूँ अमेरिकन में नहीं है, मैं स्पिरिचुअल लेवल की बात कर रहा हूँ. मोनोथीइज्म में वो कैपेसिटी नहीं है. मोनोथीइज्म इज वेरी अनकंफर्टेबल विद दैट. हम लोग हैं, मगर इंडिया में है ना, ऑन द अदर एंड, इमेजिन करो कॉलिन केपर्निक इंडिया में होता, क्या होता? कितने केस होते, कौन से केस होते, किधर डालता? अब मेरा क्वेश्चन हर इंसान को है ना, आई ऑलवेज डू दिस थॉट एक्सपेरिमेंट विद एवरीवन. आई से इमेजिन मी टू बी दिस सिटीजन ऑफ इंडिया. आई डोंट ब्रेक सिग्नल्स. आई पे माई टैक्सेस ऑन टाइम. जो भी स्टेट टैक्स, म्युनिसिपल टैक्स, वट एवर, नेशनल फेडरल टैक्स जो भी है, ठीक है. आई एम बाय एंड लार्ज वेरी काम. आई डोंट गो अराउंड पोकिंग एनीबडीज थिंग. बट मैं एक चीज नहीं करूंगा, सिर्फ एक चीज. मैं ये तुम्हारे जो जिंगोइस्टिक गेम है ना, उसका पार्ट नहीं बनूंगा, ठीक है. मगर दूसरी साइड में एक कैरेक्टर होगा, वो टैक्स की चोरी करता है, वो सिग्नल भी तोड़ता है, वो रास्ते में कूड़ा फेंकता है. मगर जब ये जिंगोइस्टिक गेम की बारी आती है ना, वो ऐसा वो ऐसे करके नाच रहा है बैठ के उधर. तुमको वो नाचने वाला अच्छा लगेगा, मगर दूसरा नहीं अच्छा लगेगा. ये क्या सोसाइटी है?
appearances. Agreed.
ये मेरी प्रॉब्लम है. So I always tell kids to think about this.
Right. एक ना बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग चीज बताता हूँ मैं आपको. कुछ टाइम पहले मैंने देवदत्त पटनायक के साथ एक पॉडकास्ट किया. तो उस पे जो रेगुलर क्रिटिसिज्म आए वो आए, और उस पे कई बार ना राजीव मल्होत्रा जी का नाम आया. तो आई स्टार्ट लुकिंग थ्रू राजीव मल्होत्रा's content from the top, and I came across this idea of the Indian grand narrative. Right? Grand narratives by themselves, we understand, as far as the progression of philosophy goes, were discarded like maybe 50 years ago to a fault. I don't think that was a smart move at all to discard grand narratives. And you know, the classic criticism that discarding the grand narrative is also a grand narrative. Whatever. However, I found that it is actually very true that if I had to represent India, I would have to represent India to the foreigner in a very localized manner to the extent I have been privileged to experience India.
Raji Malhotra is 100% right on the demand of a grand narrative.
We definitely need a grand narrative, especially because we are so different inherently, all of us. Linguistically, culturally, food-wise, la la la. India, like, abhi hamara grand narrative, I don't know. Like, the question is, what keeps India together even now? And it is a loose semblance of some kind of grand narrative instituted by the constitution and the history of the freedom struggle, somewhat, may I
Honestly,
say.
if you ask me, हमारा constitution हमको bind नहीं करता. The only thing that binds Indians is that loosely used term which everybody has no definition of, dharma.
Dharma.
You know what ties, like, I'll be way up.
Ah.
So the Coalition of Hindus of North America organized this talk for me. Very good talk. I had a great time there in Toronto. ठीक है, डाउनटाउन टोरंटो में मैं गया. इमेजिन कर, उस रूम में मुझे लगता है अगर 80 लोग आए थे मुझे सुनने को, 70-80, मुझे एग्जैक्ट नंबर याद नहीं है, उसमें से 5 भी नहीं होंगे जो मेरे जैसे नास्तिक या निरीश्वरवादी होंगे. बेरली 5 होंगे. ठीक है, स्टार्ट हुआ वो पूजा से, मतलब एक पूजा अर्चना करते हैं. ठीक है, मैंने भी की, बाय द वे, मैंने भी की. ठीक है, शांति पाठ जिसको बोलते हैं, या शांति सब के लिए बोलना, जो भी करना है. ठीक है, उसके बाद वो मुझे सुन रहे थे ध्यान से. उनको अच्छी तरह से मालूम था कि मैं उनके स्पिरिचुअल और डिवाइन क्लेम्स में नहीं मानता और मेरे को पूछेंगे तो मैं सीधा ना बोल दूंगा. उसके बाद भी किसी भी बंदे ने मुझे नथिंग बट लव दिया. What ties them to me? That is what you are talking about. I just wanted to share it anecdotally so that people understand it better. That's what ties us.
I think let me put a pin on that and get back to it. But I have a question in the meanwhile. एक level पे I agree it's dharma. To what degree is it sane to say, and I'm not saying this, I'm just asking, is that it is also cricket and Bollywood?
Very much.
Right?
I agree.
Those are the pop culture coordinates.
Yes, I agree. I 100% agree with you. But let me tell you what cricket and Bollywood would be skin deep. Dharma is soul deep. To use Nicholas Nassim Taleb. So Taleb ने वो skin in the game और soul in the game बोला. मैं skin deep और soul deep बोल रहा हूँ, taking inspiration from Taleb. So what, and I'm telling you that experience that I had in Toronto, I was asking myself कि ये लोग मुझे सुन क्यों रहे हैं? ये लोग को मालूम है मैं डिसबिलीवर हूँ. मैं रामायण के कंडक्ट करता हूँ सेशंस एवरी संडे. मैं डिसबिलीवर हूँ, मैं रामायण पढ़ रहा हूँ, मगर मुझे सुनने आते हैं. क्यों? क्योंकि उनको मालूम है ये गालियां नहीं देगा हमारे भगवान को, ये बात करेगा. सो ये जो एक, इसके लिए मैं बोल रहा हूँ, when we are going to talk about nationalism and patriotism, and especially as both you and I as content creators, because we churn out content, and content creators who live outside India and in India, because I'm going to be coming out to North America every year now. It is our moral responsibility to have these discussions on the contours of nationalism and patriotism. And this is not a scholarly discussion where I will ask you a question and you will answer. There was a reason why we designed it this way. This was a conversation between two people who want to speak for the diaspora that gets shamed every time.
Yes.
Why do we need to be shamed? भाई हमारा expression अलग है, तुम्हारा expression अलग है. तुम अपनी, and this shows, अभी एक बहुत अभी हमारा स्वास्तिक ये हमारा है
100%. मैं आपको बता नहीं सकता कितनी लड़ाइयां मैंने करी है इस चीज के लिए कि उसको हाकिन क्रूज बोलो जब तुम बात कर रहे हो उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में, स्वास्तिक बोलो मत. और मैं आपको बताता हूं, ठीक है, दिस इज, ओ थैंक गॉड यू ब्रॉट दिस अप. ठीक है, सो यू आर फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वेरी राइट. आई मीट सो मेनी इंडियन dharmic Hindu Indians, Jain Indians, Buddhist Indians that were raised here who are so deeply ashamed of their identity. I make them uncomfortable, and I don't want to take any brownie points for it, but truly, because मैं हिंदी में बात करूंगा. Recently I was hanging out with a bunch of people from Bombay. Oh, you know, these Delhi guys. I'm like, चुप बिल्कुल, क्योंकि मैं हिंदी में बात कर रहा हूं. And I maintain that. So recently I have this friend who is a staunch Jewish activist. People don't know them. They've not featured on any of my content. Staunch. They're not Jewish. They're from a different country in Europe. but for some reason their loyalties are aligned with the Jewish people, and they post constantly about it, and they're invited constantly around the world to speak about it. And every time they mention some anti-Semitic act and the Haken Cruz is involved, they'll call it the swastika. And I appealed to their common morality. I said, you want common good, give me my common good in the process. Don't call it the swastika, call it Haken Cruz. And their response was, but the world understands that as swastika. So you are willing to change the sensibilities for the Jewish people, but you will sacrifice my sensibilities in that process. Huh? And I should be okay with that. Like I should be like, हाँ हाँ ठीक है, क्योंकि दुनिया मेरे उस पे हग रही है, तुम भी उनको हगने दे रहे हो, तो ठीक है, और क्या, दुनिया ऐसे ही समझती है. What the hell does that mean? That's not the swastika.
वो बिग बॉस में था ना, टोडा कुत्ता टॉमी, साडा कुत्ता
हाँ, कुत्ता, right, exactly. And so there are instances like these that piss me off all the time. But you remember I put a pin on जो Dharma वाला idea था. I have a question, or rather a demand, request from people who are more scholarly on this than I am. You know just how Rajiv Malhotra's articulation of the grand narrative gave the idea, gave me the imagination that there is an overarching narrative that sort of India needs. In the same way, I think there has to be an ontological difference between the Abrahamic and the Dharmic end of the world that hasn't been painted to me very clearly. Probably I've not read enough or looked enough. Now, what that does is, अभी हम religion समझते हैं, जब religion is confined to God and the divine commandments around God. Dharma is not defined or limited by God. It extends to the human sphere almost consistently, to the point where God has to enter the human sphere to sometime enforce it, right? So what happens is you can have astic dharmics too. You can have nastic dharmics too. You can have all varieties of people who believe in this idea of dharmic morality without necessarily believing in the divine injunction that comes on top of it. And this is one of the many ways in which these two strands of believing in God are completely different. And if we had some clarity on the absolute difference between the two, maybe this point that you were raising, why would they listen to you, will become more obvious.
Yeah,
because they're go on.
नहीं sorry, मैं तेरे को सिर्फ एक ही चीज बोलना चाहता था. A lot of these answers that you're looking for का precursor is given in Rajiv Malhotra's Being Different. See, to start from what we are begins from what we are not. Always remember that.
Yeah, neti.
Yes. So right. What we are se pehle what we are not bought tha. So in 2010 when I read Being Different, now I may have many disagreements with Rajiv ji at an intellectual level. We have humongous disagreements. But that one book, Being Different by Rajiv Malhotra, had the most profound effect on me as an individual. And I am the biggest evangelist of that book. I tell every young kid to read that book, Being Different. You know, if somebody comes to you and says, what is it to be an Indian or a Hindu? You give them that book. Say, we are not this. Now, what we are is a different occasion, because then I will have, are you asking me what is we at that time? Are you talking about we, my panth? Are you talking about my prant? Are you talking about my desh? Are you talking about my philosophy, and my philosophy which darshan? And then they'll be like, oh, you're just trying to wiggle out of the answer. No, I'm playing on my turf.
I'm playing on my terms. Yes.
That's what. And they will not play on your terms. And that's where you have to make them come to your turf. Understand that, yes, there is always a principle of charity involved. And I, as a student of philosophy, I always believe in the principle of charity, that you have to be charitable to the other side also. But then the other side also has to be charitable to you if your worldview is so different, which is why this discussion of nationalism and patriotism is very important. And which is why, as honest players, as honest seekers, we need to criticize every single bad apple inside the Indian nationalistic patriotic milieu that forces and shoves down this way of liking and loving India on all of us.
Right.
Well, I mean, who are you to tell me how I'm supposed to love my country?
Right. Oh my God. And have you introspected? Have you introspected how you've loved your country? And then what is this moral obligation to love my country in your way? You may be whoever the hell in the world. You may be whoever the hell in the world. You may be from my side. You may be from the opposite side. I decide my decisions on my terms. And I think that is a freedom that, being off the land. Here is another thing that I don't think Indians truly appreciate or understand, is that you are not born into India. I at least think. I think you are born on land from your parents. And what that does by itself is give you a certain set of rights. One of them is to speak your mind. One of them is to make your decisions on your own terms. Of course, when you play with society, you trade off some of those freedoms for the sake of society. Of course, that happens. That's a philosophical, psychological point being made for centuries at this point, no doubt. But it does not take away from the. I don't owe my life to the government. I don't owe my life to the nation until I decide who I owe my life to. And I think that is a automatic skip step that a lot of Indians make.
No, so it's the problem with the jingoist is that you are nothing if you are not Indian. First of all, I am born. My Indian identity primarily was merely by accident. I was born there.
Right.
I had no role or control on that one. So
Right.
don't get so excited about all of that. After that, today I voluntarily choose to like that identity is a separate issue.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean I hate the identity if I'm outside India. Because this podcast is a podcast that has a huge diaspora audience. So I have to speak from a global diasporic perspective, not just an Indian perspective. And by the way, which is why, again, I'm bringing everyone back to my talk in Toronto, is I asked the Canadians, right? They were all good Canadians there, right? You know, they were not Indians. वो सारे Canadian थे. वो सिर्फ they happened to be of Indian origin and Hindu faith.
Right.
They happened to be. They were Canadians. There was a Guyanese Hindu there too. Now my question to them was, what is it to be a Canadian Hindu? It was a very simple question, right? But believe me, they did not have an answer, and they will have an answer because they'll think about it. Like, I know what is it to be an Indian Hindu. I know it. I know. I think American Hindus also have an idea, mota moti taur pe, but Canadians did not. Now, the question again comes back to this shoving down of things down people's throats historically has only worked in societies where either they are Islamist or China. It has not worked anywhere else.
Right.
So if you are going to try to shove this down the throat of Indians, look, I mean, best of luck is my answer to you, because you really are trying to convince a whole lot of people who are going to be turned off. Which is why I again say, I'm not saying India needs to have a law that allows the burning of a flag. That can be debated. But America is still a strong society. Are you trying to say because they allow burning of flags, that society is crumbling? I don't know. I don't think so. And you know what happens is there are second order and third order effects, which is what I want to talk about now before we take a few questions of this mindset. And यहाँ मैं तुझे वापस पूछना चाहता हूँ. Jingoism has second order, third order effects. Then, you know, if I have pinned you on the issue of nationalism and patriotism कि मैं तुझे यहाँ नहीं बोलने दूंगा ना, then that authoritarian mindset has a concept creeped in every aspect of life. फिर मैं तुझे इस पे भी नहीं बोलने दूंगा, फिर मैं तुझे इस पे भी नहीं बोलने दूंगा, फिर मैं तुझे इस पे भी नहीं बोलने दूंगा, फिर बेसिकली मैं तुझे कुछ बोलना ही नहीं दूंगा, सिर्फ तू तब बोलेगा जब मैं तुझे बोलूंगा. और जो बेसिकली the long road of jingoism ends up in what China is. And I don't like to be like China. हाँ उनके पास पैसे हैं, हाँ उनके पास ये है, हाँ उनके पास वो है, मगर भाई चाइना का ऑपोजिट मॉडल अमेरिका भी है. मैं नहीं बोल रहा हूं हमको अमेरिका भी बनना है, हम यूनिक बन सकते हैं, मगर भाई चाइना तो मत बनो ना. So what do you think about the second and third order effects of this jingoism?
Brilliant. Before I get to second and third order, there is a categorical mistake also we make, right? Which is either nationalism or not nationalism, and whether a country survives because of nationalism or the opposite of nationalism, right? For instance, you were saying burning of flags in America does not lead to the society being crumbled. And the singular reason for that is it has nothing to do with the flag. It has everything to do with their economics. And this is what we forget in these cultural discussions, is that if you give people an economic pipeline to make enough money, which was the case, say, I'm not saying it is not the case now, but 15 years ago, India was going through some kind of an economic boom in the sense that there was money. People did not even care about corruption until things started to happen at a really poor scale. where we were like, bhai ye to bahut galat ho raha hai. And that is what I mean. People partially get invested in making money in this capitalist nightmare that we live. They forget about these cultural issues very quickly. That's one way of looking at it. The other is, if you have something to be stable about, which is the cash, the cultural issues can take a second seat and maybe then dealt with better. More on this later. Second, third order level pe, the other thing that happens with this kind of narrative is that these they become compliance frameworks, right? They become reason to form in groups, out groups as quickly as what you're probably opposing was. So for instance, you know, the term, what is it called, the Abrahamicization of Hinduism,
Oh yeah, I
right?
call them Abrahamic Hindus.
Right, Abrahamic Hindus, right? It's nationalism sort of does a similar effect कि अगर
Exactly
तुमने उसको
वही.
नहीं माना तो ठीक है भाई, तुम नेशनलिस्ट नहीं, अब तुम कुछ नहीं बोल सकते, अब तुम गलत आदमी हो, अब तुम देश के लिए नहीं हो. एक से पांच कंक्लूजन फट से ड्रॉ हो गए. अच्छा, अब इसी को अगर आप प्लेस कर दो हमारे प्रैग्मेटिक प्लेइंग फील्ड, मॉडर्न कम्युनिकेशन टेक्नोलॉजी में, तो एक आदमी को यहां से बोलना है एंटी नेशनल और वहां 25 लोग बोलने बंद हो गए. उसी एब्राहमिक टेंडेंसी जिसको तुम फाइट करने की कोशिश कर रहे हो अपने कल्चरल रेनेसांस में, वो ही यूज करते हुए तुमने एक बाउंड्री, एक हद बना दी. और ये जो कंप्लायंस स्मगलिंग होती है ना विद दीज कॉन्सेप्ट्स, दे टेक अवे द वेरी एसेंस ऑफ दोस कॉन्सेप्ट्स. लाइक आई ऑफ्टन हैव दिस थॉट व्हिच इज दैट ये लोग जो आईएएस आईपीएस और इन सब के पेपर देते हैं सिविल सर्विसेज के, या जो पॉलिटिक्स में जाते हैं, इन लोगों के लिए नेशनलिस्टिक टेंडेंसीज शुड बी डिफॉल्ट. अदरवाइज आप अलाउड ही नहीं होने चाहिए. क्यों अलाउ होगे भैया? मतलब वो तो आपकी जॉब रिक्वायरमेंट होनी चाहिए.
Exactly, very
है
good
ना?
point.
राइट, कि मतलब अगर मैं, एंड आई थिंक ऑल्सो मिस्टर मल्होत्रा
Allegiance to the state. I think
और
what
क्या?
you're trying to say is allegiance to the state of India.
बिल्कुल राइट, एग्जैक्टली. और वट एवर दैट माइट मीन, वेदर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनली एंड सच. क्योंकि अगर मैं, इफ आई वर्क फॉर Apple and I say Google's better, then I'm being stupid. I'm saying Apple's bad in this way and Apple's bad in that way. I'm a bad rep for my company. Even in the most trivial corporate way of looking at it, you must be a representative of your brand. Otherwise, what are you trying to do? Right? For them, it must be a very important principle. For the rest of us, it should have a different nature to it. What that nature could be, we can debate sometime else. But those are my concerns with the second, third order things. We get lost in these battles because we do not realize that the real fight is somewhere else. That is
Yep.
GDP and economics and such. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
No. So I'll use, and again, आज सुबह से मुझे बहुत तबीयत की गालियां पड़ रही हैं, मतलब आप लोगों की रात इंडिया वालों, क्योंकि मैंने आज फिर से अपोज किया किसी चीज को. मतलब मैं रोज ही नए शगुफे लेके बैठ जाता हूँ.
हाँ.
तो जी ये मैंने न्यूज पढ़ी, एंड व्हाई डू आई डू दिस इज बिकॉज आई केयर फॉर माय कंट्री. सो जी एक ऐसा कोट मैंने पढ़ा, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच डजंट कवर अब्यूजिंग प्राइम मिनिस्टर, इलाहाबाद हाई कोर्ट.
Whoa. Freedom of speech does not include.
डजंट कवर अब्यूजिंग प्राइम मिनिस्टर. ये लॉ बीट ने ट्वीट किया. वन मुमताज मंसूरी from his Facebook ID had made highly derogatory remarks against the Prime Minister, Home Minister and other ministers of the government of India. तो जी उठा लो, जेल में डाल दो. और ये सिर्फ मोदी के लिए नहीं होता,
हर प्राइम मिनिस्टर के लिए,
हर प्राइम मिनिस्टर, हर नेता, हर एमएलए, हर एमपी के लिए होता है. राहुल गांधी के लिए भी हुआ है, सोनिया गांधी के लिए भी हुआ है, योगी के लिए भी हुआ है, दिग्विजय सिंह के लिए भी हो चुका होगा, हर आदमी के लिए हो चुका है. मैं जस्ट एग्जांपल्स ले रहा हूं. तो ये एक यूनिक इंडियन प्रॉब्लम है. और अगेन दिस इज डायरेक्टली कनेक्टेड टू द माइंडसेट ऑफ नेशनलिज्म एंड पेट्रियटिज्म. इट इज दिस कंट्रोल माइंडसेट. और फिर बोल दोगे आपको गाली देने की क्या जरूरत है. मैं क्या बोल रहा हूं गाली दो, मैं ये बोल रहा हूं मगर आप में इतनी भी अक्ल नहीं है कि आप एक सरकार को इतनी शक्ति दे रहे हो कि नहीं, इंडिया यूनिक है. जज को क्रिटिसाइज नहीं कर सकते, वो आपको धर लेगा. पार्लिमेंट के मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट को आप क्रिटिसाइज नहीं कर सकते, वो प्रिविलेज मोशन ले आएगा. रिसेंटली क्या हुआ था, ये बेचारा सुशांत सरीन टाइम्स नाउ पे था, और टीएमसी की एमपी बोलती है सुशांत सरीन को कि आई विल ब्रिंग प्रिविलेज मोशन अगेंस्ट यू. ठीक है जी, तो ये हो गए. फिर आपने पुलिस को बोल दिया इंडिया में कोई, उसने तो आपके पिछवाड़े में ही कुछ डाल देना है, वो तीसरी बात हो गई. चौथा हो गया और कुछ नहीं है तो ये नया आ गया, एंटी नेशनल, डाल दो जी जेल में. और एंटी नेशनल का भी ये मतलब कुछ भी चालू है. जिसको उठाओ सुबह उठो, हाँ कौन दिख गया भाई,
आज
मस्त
कौन एंटी नेशनल है,
आज कौन
आज
एंटी
कौन सा
नेशनल
नया
है.
एंटी नेशनल है.
मतलब it has become like I get up and Joe Rogan used the perfect word. This is recreational outrage now.
This is
Like people,
recreational outrage.
this is recreational outrage. People just get up in the morning and they are looking for people to go after. And this is like, हम लोग सारे बुल है और हम देख रहे हैं किसके पिछवाड़े में अपना सींग घुसाड़ दें.
बिल्कुल.
And we are just going after. And then, they have a problem with a person like me who says, no, I am a Modi voter. I have never hidden my voting preference. I will vote for Modi again in 2024 if he stands. But I will not stand for a law that says I cannot abuse Narendra Modi. He is not bigger than that. And the same logic I want to apply, that I should be allowed to criticize my country, no matter how derogatory it is, no matter how irritating it is, because without freedom, we don't have democracy.
Agreed. Without freedom, we have no innovation. We don't move forward. We just stay there. We are stuck. And somebody else is controlling where we are stuck. But besides that, like, मेरे को पता है क्या लगता है, कई बार ना लोगों के दिमाग से पावर एज अ कॉन्सेप्ट का रिलेशनशिप विद द गांधी फैमिली एंड कांग्रेस खत्म नहीं हुआ है.
Yeah.
What that means is अब 10 साल हो गए मोदी एंड बीजेपी को, बट वी हैवंट मेड द एसोसिएशन कि ये लोग पावर में. और आपकी फाइट शुरू से पावर के अगेंस्ट थी, आप पावर के मिसयूज के अगेंस्ट थी, उसके साथ एसोसिएटेड चेहरे के अगेंस्ट नहीं थी. विच इज नॉट टू से कि कांग्रेस को मत क्रिटिसाइज करो, मजाक बन गए, उन्हें जितना क्रिटिसाइज करना है करो, बट विच ऑल्सो सेज कि आप यू कैन नॉट गिव दिस प्रिविलेज टू एनीबडी इन पावर बिकॉज एब्सोल्यूट पावर करप्ट्स एब्सोल्युटली. देयर इज नो टू वेज अबाउट इट. कल ना जब आपने मेरे को हम ये करने वाले थे, आई वाज वाचिंग अ लॉट ऑफ ऐसे ही हिस्टोरिकल डॉक्यूमेंट्रीज, रात को डॉक्यूमेंट्रीज भी के यूट्यूब वीडियोस, एंड समथिंग अबाउट नेपोलियन. सो आई कवर्ड द हिस्ट्री ऑफ नेपोलियन प्रीटी सिग्निफिकेंटली yesterday just out of interest. Napoleon initiated a motion in a now free France to say, can I become the emperor? And 99% people were like, yes, forget the French Revolution, forget we ever took off the royal family and the aristocrats and the nobility, let us make you the emperor. And that is how susceptible people are to strong leaders. Strong leaders can really charm the mind out of you because you need so there was one more thing. Okay? So Napoleon eventually is taken over by the allied forces, he's thrown to an island, he's coming back, and now Henry the 16th is in France and Napoleon's riding to him, and neither of them are like competent leaders enough, but there is no third front, there is no third leader, and so Napoleon eventually gets back. But the point is, very often what you need is a concept to believe in. The reason why this recreational outrage happens, sadly, is because we need a reason to believe and form groups and identity, to belong somewhere, to think that this is right and that is wrong. That is as fundamental as our mind and our psychology gets around issues like these. And so, what has happened is, we have associated goodness with a certain someone, badness with a certain someone, and we are not allowing ourselves to update those notions as time moves on. And we are forgetting our true fight is against unfreedom, is against some kind of misuse of power, is against the proper application of corruption. And that, I think, is not okay, because what we do not foresee is that we might be walking ourselves into a trap in so many ways. And I mean individually. We are walking ourselves into hero worship, for which Indians have this insane instinct that never seems to go away. Being popular in India is very different from being popular in the world. Right? Being a YouTuber in India is very different from being a YouTuber in the world. It's not the same. We have this deep instinct for hero worship. We cannot seem to let go of that. And I think that is a ready-made recipe for downfall for any people, anywhere, ever. What
And
do you think?
you know, my request to all the jingoists is that please define what is anti-national.
Once and for all. Draw
Yeah,
complete
please
and
define.
straight boundaries.
Be
Yes.
very clear in your definition of what is an anti-national. Because if by anti-national you are meaning to say that you are actively working towards balkanizing the Indian state and forming an armed revolution against the Indian state, भाई उसके पीछे तो मैं ही पड़ जाऊंगा, तुम्हारे पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. ठीक है? That
Right.
is when you are directly harming the territorial and constitutional integrity of India, then I understand. राइट, इंडिया को बॉल्कनाइज करने की बात है और वो है, एंड यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट एन आर्म्ड रिबेलियन, देन आई बिलीव. मगर इंडिया में अंडर द गार्ब ऑफ जिंगोइज्म एंड एंटी नेशनल दिस, बॉस, लुक एट द सेक्शन 124, हाउ मिसयूज्ड इट इज इन इंडिया. बॉस, every time you use these laws, You show how weak the Indian state is. You show how bad the law and order in India is. You expose India when you do things like this. So my request to all the jingoists of the world is that you you cannot call me an anti-national without first explaining what nationalism is according to you in a robust, definitive way. And until you don't do that, I will try to follow as much of the law as I can, and don't shove it down to me. So before we start taking questions, प्रखर तेरे को और कुछ बोलना है तो बता. अच्छा हाँ, मेरे को ये भी पूछना है, तेरी बुक आ रही है, उसके बारे में भी बता.
अच्छा, हाँ. अरे मेरी किस्मत इतनी अच्छी है, मेरी बुक का टाइटल डोंट शट अप, मैंने अपनी टीम से लड़ के उसका टाइटल रखवाया डोंट शट अप. और मेरे को इतनी अच्छी अपॉर्चुनिटी मिली ऑन ब्रांड काम करने की डोंट शट अप वाले. तो माय बुक्स, लेट मी गेट टू द बुक इन अ सेकंड. मैं एक चीज दिमाग में सोच रहा था, मेरे को स्लिप क्यों हो रही है दिमाग से, चलो छोड़ो, अब स्लिप हो गई, अब कुछ नहीं कर सकते. एनीवे, कमिंग बैक टू द बुक, आई पुट आउट माय फर्स्ट बुक डोंट शट अप, व्हिच इज अ compilation of communication tools and techniques. We took out 25 of the most common situations that a young adult faces in their day to day where they do not know how to put themselves across, and I broke it down in the most, me and my co-author broke it down in the most systematic, in the most pointed way possible ever. Now, we released this book for pre-order and we did not anticipate the traffic we would get. And once we did get that traffic, we were like, एक मिनट सेल रोकते हैं, पहले फिगर आउट करते हैं प्रिंटिंग कैसे होनी है और ये सारे काम कैसे होने हैं, क्योंकि हम सेल्फ पब्लिश कर रहे हैं. अगर हम एक पब्लिशर के पास जाते, वो लगाता है 1-1.5 साल पूरा. और अभी मेरी टीम राउंड द क्लॉक काम कर रही है, दिल्ली में कुछ, बॉम्बे में कुछ, फिगरिंग आउट प्रिंटिंग प्रेसेस हो भी गई है, प्रिंटिंग प्रेस फिगर आउट, प्रिंट होगी, डिस्ट्रीब्यूट होगी, सब होगा. Books in India are not a profit making business. If you look at my accounts, it'll be like it's a horror show. So there is, if at all I will make some money, it will be marginal. The point is, there is so many questions I get around communication and the many lapses in communication patterns that people have, that I decided to write a complete book on the subject. You can find the book. I'm not sure if the sale's been switched on again by my team, at don'tshutup.in. You can always go there and look at it. I'm still kind of stuck on what I was thinking before. चलो छोड़ो, निकल गया दिमाग से. एनीवे, हाँ, क्वेश्चन पूछ लो भाई, किसी को पूछना है तो.
हाँ चलो, अभी मैं क्वेश्चंस लेना शुरू कर देता हूँ. फिर किसी ने पूछा है, what if we are just focused on nation building? Wouldn't our cultural ethos naturally gain strength as our nation does? I think this person is kind of echoing your thought. But
I also don't think they're completely independent. They go hand in hand, but one does not go with the other at all. Like without the other at all. Like you cannot just be cultural, and particularly cultural, if not backed by the economic, does not survive long term. Like very often I think of what India is trying to do in two models. They are not precise, they're not accurate, but there is an Iran model and there is an Israel model, right? Where it's something to do with identity and reclaiming it and then moving forward in line with that identity. And you can see with Iran, without the economics, it just became this very like weird militaristic religiosity, full friendly, like it did not realize its past glory at all, and it's been fighting for like what, 40-50 years now, since the Shah was kicked out in 79, I think. On the other hand, you can see Israel taking those steps very firmly and moving in that direction very properly. Now there might be geopolitical reasons behind the same and such, but at the end of the day, this helps us imagine at least what direction we want to be going in. And the cultural without the economic is a sure shot recipe for infighting. You will not be able to sustain it. If your coffers are not full, if your stomachs are not full, if your dreams are not met, your dreams are going to be me versus you. And that's just not a great picture to have. That's my humble opinion on the same.
Okay, someone has asked, don't you think Indian nationalism is also necessary to counter ethnic nationalism like Islamic nationalism, Sikh nationalism, Tamil nationalism? And in the current times, Indian nationalism is seen as an othering force which othered Muslims. Don't you think civilizationalism also othered Abrahamic minorities? I think the first half is for you, the second half is for me.
Okay, so I don't see why the word nationalism is important in that question at all. You could have just said, like, isn't Indianism better as an alternative against, say, ethnicism of any nature? Because like my point is, this sort of goes back to the Rajiv Malhotra point about grand narrative. If you had a grand narrative that sort of includes, and I haven't watched that video yet, but there is a video called Muslims in the Indian Grand Narrative by Rajiv Malhotra also, which is from prima facie seems like his attempt to sort of bring in what might be othered into the fold of this grand narrative, right? We need some kind of a narrative that encompasses everything from the past to the present to the future, that we can all believe in and join hands upon. And that narrative by definition has to include quality of development, not just quality of going back to our glorious past. Those are two different things. They might be similar, they might appear similar, which is the more dangerous part, but they're two different things.
अब मेरे को जो क्वेश्चन पूछा था, आई रिपीट, दे वांट टू से दैट Indian nationalism is seized and as a othering force which othered Muslims. Don't you think civilizationalism also othered Abrahamic minorities? No, because you fall into the classic trap of assuming a dharmic civilization state is like an Abrahamic civilizational state, because you are assuming the nature of dharma is the same as the nature of Abrahamism. Dharma expands and absorbs and digests. Abrahamism looks for the infidel or the kafir. So an Abrahamic state will be like Abrahamism, a civilizational dharmic state will be like that. But when I say all these things, I don't mean to say in the sense that the state has to forget what secularism is and stuff like that, etc., etc. I want a secular state when it comes to governance. I want a civilizational state when it comes to identity. Because let me tell you one thing, Indian Hindus become Hindu when they leave India, which is a shame.
It is a shame. And it is also accurate. You do not respect it as much in your domestic playground as you do once you're here, because you have to
Yes.
fight for your identity here.
Yes.
I felt
और
that.
यहाँ पे जाके मंदिर जाता है बच्चा, वहां पे नहीं जाता. यहाँ पे जाके वो तो ऐसा है कि वो जो फाइन लाइन बिटवीन बीइंग इंस्टाग्राम चमन, जो गन वायलेंस इन अमेरिका के पोस्टर लेके साउथ बॉम्बे में जाते हो, और बीइंग एन इंस्टाग्राम चमन जो भारत माता की जय मार दूंगा मैं तुमको, वो टाइप का आदमी. भारत माता की जय मैं भी बोलता हूँ, मगर मैं वैसे नहीं बोलता हूँ. और मैं सीना ठोक के बोलता हूँ भारत माता की जय, मगर मैं तुम्हारे जैसे नहीं कि दूसरे के हलक में हाथ डाल के घुसेड़ के मारना, वो नहीं. वो दोनों, वो जो एक इंस्टाग्राम का एक चमन है जिसको कोई कनेक्शन नहीं है इंडिया से, और जो इंस्टाग्राम का दूसरा चमन है जो तुम्हारे अंदर ठूस ठूस के डालना चाह रहा है, वो दोनों से मुझे प्रॉब्लम है. हम लोग सब बीच में हैं, झूलते हैं इधर से उधर, उधर से इधर. हमको जीने दो. और मोस्ट लोग वैसे होते हैं. चलो अभी अगला क्वेश्चन लेते हैं. सो दूसरा बंदा है, ये कहता है कि प्रखर, इट्स नॉट अबाउट कवरिंग अप फॉर इकोनॉमिक अपॉर्चुनिटी. Hindus are becoming more Hindu when they go out of India. As a 90s kid, everything fed to us was from the Western lens. So this nationalism now is a way of us finding our Hindu identity. So what? But basically, बंदा ये कहना चाह रहा है कि यार मुझे तो मालूम ही नहीं था कि क्या मेरी आइडेंटिटी थी. आज ये नेशनलिज्म से मैं मेरी सिविलाइजेशनल आइडेंटिटी से आइडेंटिफाई कर रहा हूँ.
To that limited point, I 100% agree. I'm a 90s kid. In fact, I even say मेरी रियलिटी ग्रोइंग अप, यू नो, जो साउथ बॉम्बे वाला लड़का नहीं है जो गन वायलेंस के लिए प्रोटेस्ट कर रहा है, उसके साथ उससे काफी नजदीक आइडेंटिटी थी, क्योंकि मैं डिज्नी चैनल और ये हॉलीवुड पिक्चरें, हम लाइक आई फिट सो मच बेटर हियर देन आई डू इन फरीदाबाद, बिकॉज मेरी सेंसिबिलिटीज वर कंडीशन्ड दैट वे बिकॉज ऑफ द मीडिया आई वाज एक्सपोज्ड टू. सो आई डू नॉट डिसएग्री, एंड दैट इज व्हाई आई एम फॉन्ड of this entire discourse. That is why I have so many people from this side of the political spectrum on my shows and on my conversations. So to that limited point, I agree, but I don't think you are giving enough, how do you say, you are giving enough water to how manipulation happens and how your bandwidth, your mental bandwidth for your concerns is limited. You can only, the masses can only focus on one grand issue at a time. If you want to see that, look at the chronology of news telling. आज ये issue है, 6 दिन बाद ये इशू है, एक ही इशू है जिसपे सब लोग वो रिक्रिएशनल आउटरेज मार रहे हैं, और वो इशू कभी इकोनॉमिक्स नहीं है. एंड दैट इज माय प्रॉब्लम, बिकॉज जब भुखमरी आती है ना, तब ये सारे कल्चरल फिनोमेना वजह बन जाते हैं लड़ाई की, प्राइड की नहीं. और वो कंसर्न जिंदा रखना अपने दिमाग में. दैट्स ऑल आई एम सेइंग.
ओके, ये क्वेश्चन है, question for both. Don't you think nationalism is used by hyper patriots or hyper nationalists to hide HR violations committed by state forces in Kashmir and northeast India? Partially yes.
Very tricky question.
No, मैं तो सीधा बोलता हूँ आंसर, partially yes, sometimes yes. अब
No
तुम मत
idea,
बोलो.
no comment.
No idea, no comment दो. मैं बोल रहा हूँ yes, partially yes. I think Indian state has done some things that are questionable, but like all things, there is a gray zone when it comes to national security, and we should fight for the human rights of each and every person. But at the same time, there is zero compromise on India's territorial integrity.
And
Let me be very crystal clear on that. 1 इंच नहीं देना. 1947 में एक विभाजन हो गया, अभी 1 मिलीमीटर भी नहीं देंगे. तो दोनों के लिए उतना ही फाइट करेंगे, लोगों के ह्यूमन राइट्स के लिए और इंडिया की टेरिटोरियल इंटेग्रिटी के लिए. दे आर नॉट
Mutually
divorced from
exclusive.
each other.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. They can
They
be
are
found. Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
So, and I know Prakhar does not want to answer this. मैं बोल रहा हूँ, I'm putting my views on the line. मैं
Right.
डाल रहा हूँ.
Right.
ठीक
Right.
है.
हाँ.
अच्छा कि भाई तुम्हारे इकोनॉमिक पॉइंट ने बड़े लोगों का दिल दुखा. बोलता है जीडीपी के पहले लॉ एंड ऑर्डर इंपॉर्टेंट है प्रखर.
हाँ, अब मेरे को याद आ गया मैं क्या कह रहा था. थैंक यू फॉर रेजिंग दिस. थैंक यू गाइस.
हम्म.
इंडिया में तुम लॉ एंड ऑर्डर की बात कर रहे हो. प्रोसेस इज द पनिशमेंट. इंडिया में लॉ एक्सरसाइज करने के लिए यूज नहीं किया जाता. केस इसलिए नहीं होते ताकि केस खत्म हो जाए. इंडिया में केस इसलिए किए जाते ताकि वो चलते रहें. अब तुम समझो, तुम लॉ एंड ऑर्डर की बात कर रहे हो, किस लेवल पे तुम प्राउड हो इस फंडामेंटल इशू के साथ, जहां सुप्रीम कोर्ट का चीफ जस्टिस टीवी पे जाके रोता है कि भैया हमसे केस नहीं निपट रहे, इतने केस हैं. सबसे पहले जो तुम्हें बात करनी है कल्चरली भी, वो यहां से शुरू करनी है कि पुलिस रिफॉर्म आए. कि मैं जब पुलिस को देखूं मेरी फटे ना, मेरे को भरोसा है कि मेरा देश मेरे साथ खड़ा है अगर कुछ इलीगल होता है तो. नॉट जस्ट दैट बट ऑल्सो, सिर्फ इफ देयर वाज, आई थिंक आई वाज डिस्कसिंग दिस व्हाटएवर, इफ देयर वाज ओनली वन change in the entire thing that I would demand in India is cases 6 महीने में खत्म हो जाए. 50% crime, property disputes, XYZ, ABC, and property disputes have a direct relationship with business doing abilities. They will get swept away. What does that do? That changes the landscape of Indian economic progress. This is how culture, and in this case, constitutional culture, law and order culture, is related to the economics of the world, or for that matter, the country in this case. So, if you were to begin fighting for anything at all, begin fighting for law and order. That will automatically help economics. Economics के लिए आपको सब्सिडीज देने की जरूरत नहीं है. हम हर साल जब टैक्स कोड निकाल के लाते हैं, फाइनेंस बिल आता है, 25% ऑफ द टैक्स बिल, फाइनेंस बिल, इज फिक्सिंग इनकम टैक्स एक्ट फ्रॉम लास्ट ईयर्स फाइनेंस बिल. तुम बेवकूफी समझो, तुम देखो कितना गोइंग अराउंड योर ओन टेल सिचुएशन है ये. हाउ आर यू रनिंग आफ्टर योर ओन टेल? कि मैंने पिछले साल 2021 में ये अमेंडमेंट्स लाए, फिर मेरे को रियलाइज हुआ एक साल में सीएस ने इंडिया का चूतिया काट दिया बकायदा इन सारे अमेंडमेंट्स के साथ. तो अब मैं उनको चेंज करूंगा इन व्यू ऑफ द. कहां है सोशल ट्रस्ट बिटवीन द इंडिविजुअल एंड द इंस्टीट्यूशन? कहीं नहीं है. ये इश्यूज हैं रियल इंडिया के, कि मैं जब अपना आधार कार्ड बनवाने जाता हूं, मैं बिना रिश्वत के काम नहीं करा सकता वहां पे. और वो आदमी कहता है मैं रिश्वत क्यों ना लूं, ये आदमी मेरे को ढंग से काम ही नहीं करने देते, जो आ जाते हैं बार बार मुंह उठा के, इनको पता ही नहीं है क्या करना है. ये रियल इश्यूज है. यहां कल्चर और इकोनॉमिक मीट करता है. बाकी तो सब चीजें हैं जो अपने टाइम के साथ सुलझेंगी. बट अगर आप इन चीजों को लेके फाइट नहीं करोगे ना, तो आई डोंट थिंक हम लोग वो पॉलिटी बना पाएंगे जो हम बनाना चाहते हैं.
Yeah, in
शायद मैं
fact,
गलत हूं.
if you are a nationalist, you should be the first one demanding law and order in this country, which is India. But ठीक है. Okay, next was, what if we are just focused on nation building? Wouldn't our cultural ethos naturally
ये
gain
हो चुका है.
strength as our nation does? Yeah, ये हो गया
ये हो
था.
चुका है. हाँ.
Is our inferiority complex, in our inferiority complex of civilizational, I don't understand. क्या क्वेश्चन लिखा है इतनी मेरे को. Is our inferiority complex civilizational at all, or does it develop post colonization and partition? Is this phenomenon just Hindu or pan India? I think it's a human phenomenon. Basically human beings tend to, matlab, I think what the person is trying to ask is कि ये जो अल्ट्रा हाइपर नेशनलिस्ट तरीका होता है करने का चीजें, क्या ये सिर्फ यूनिकली हिंदू है कि ये डिजीज यूनिवर्सल है? आई एम paraphrasing the question, I guess.
The need for identity is a universal human phenomena.
Yeah.
The real question, and this is not an answer, but a further question is, I don't even think the word Hindu was used before colonization. I think there was no such thing as Hindu.
का word है.
It's an Arabic Persian word. So, agar if you go back historically enough, what you will end up, and again, this is a question to both left and the right, is that what was the dominant identity? जिसको लेके हम अब एक मॉडर्न नैरेटिव कंस्ट्रक्ट करें, और दिस आइडेंटिटी ऑफ धार्मिक हिंदू सनातन धर्म, व्हाटएवर नेशनलिज्म दैट वी सॉर्ट ऑफ bring into the play now, is it a modern construction post 47, mostly post 2000s, or is there any historical coordinate to it realistically, not manufactured, realistically, because Hindu was no word back in the day, right? So
I guess the word Hindu is used now because it's popular.
Same reason.
Yeah, it's just, it's become more of a popular pop culture identity, so that's why the word Hindu is used. As far as I'm concerned, it's very simple. Your identity and the way identity shapes and forms is nothing unique for a Hindu. It is there universally. People have these patterns universally, and they will always have this patterns universally. um, So you can't do much. अभी एक आदमी ने फिर से तुझे क्वेश्चन पूछा है क्योंकि तूने पुलिस रिफॉर्म्स की बात की. इंडिया में पुलिस रिफॉर्म्स कैसे होंगे जब साउथ बॉम्बे वाली एंटी ब्लैक लाइव्स मैटर,
तो साउथ बॉम्बे वाली आंटी के पास डिसीजन मेकिंग पावर क्या है? क्यों बूगीमैन बना रहे हो साउथ बॉम्बे वाली आंटी? इररेलेवेंट है, उन पे कोई आंख भी नहीं झपकाता. साउथ बॉम्बे वाली आंटी छोड़ो, एमपी में वो गांव में जो वो किसान है ना, उसकी बात करो. क्या साउथ बॉम्बे वो बूगीमैन बना रखे हैं यार. वो इलीटिस्ट जिनको तुम हटा रहे थे ना, मोस्टली अब आउट ऑफ द फ्रे हैं. तुम मानो चाहे मत मानो, अब उनको बूगीमैन बनाते हुए पीटते रहो और 5 7 8 साल, क्या हो जाएगा उससे? रियल चेंजेस दिखाओ ना. एनीवे,
हाँ देख, यही बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्ट है. सी, दिस इज व्हाट आई कॉल द स्ट्रॉ मैन फैलेसी. यू फाइंड अ स्ट्रॉ मैन एंड यू पेंट द स्ट्रॉ मैन एंड देन यू से अब मैंने अपनी प्रॉब्लम्स आउटसोर्स कर दिया. आई एम नॉट सेइंग द व्यूअर इज डूइंग दैट, but this is a typical straw man argument. And the user says it was a joke. Very good.
कोई
The
सीन
joke
नहीं है.
worked because so
इट ट्रिगर्ड.
it did its job. काम हो गया. So,
राइट राइट
right. So, but the point is that this, while this user must be joking, many don't.
राइट.
They use this straw man when I give arguments for free speech. And free speech and anti-nationalism are intertwined, whether you like it or not, because a lot of times what is perceived as anti-national or what is perceived as against nationhood is actually a free speech issue. And maybe this will be our last bit, and then we'll clamp down. Can you actually have a robust national identity without free speech, Prakhar? This will be my last question to you.
No, I don't even think you can have a robust self identity. And if you want to check that, go check with your father. The father that did not let you speak ghar pe, agar if you had a strict dad, by the way, in case you did not, or a strict mom, or any strict relative, sibling, whatever. If you are not allowed to speak, you are not allowed psychologically to construct your sense of self. You think mostly by speaking. Speaking, historically, evolutionarily, probably evolved as a means of thinking, not communicating. This is a very major, because it's hypothetical, we don't know for sure. This is one of the most dominant hypotheses in the field. Speaking is tied to thinking at the level of emergence. So when you make free speech, and developing country, somebody was saying does not have never had free speech, you are using that as an excuse, the same way your father used chup rahe beta as an excuse to shut you out when he did not know how to answer your questions. This is the problem. You are becoming exactly like the person you were trying to oppose growing up. How will you figure out? Actually, I don't want to use a crass example, but if I may, how will you figure out whether you're fond of X or Y? Skip the crassness. Unless you are allowed to experiment with it and articulate and verbalize it. And articulation, by the way, is not just articulation of speech, but is also articulation of action. When I hold this, my hand is articulating itself around the cup. It is the same phenomenon, and this is John Piaget and such. But the point is that your body and your mind are intrinsically connected, which is your Advait, are intrinsically connected in operating in the world. They are not separate from each other. And so is speech, which is probably the most advanced tool that the mind has to construct reality. So without free speech, तुम nationalism की क्या बात करोगे? आज तुम्हारे हाथ में है ये बोलना कि nationalism ये है, कल को तुम्हारा पड़ोसी तुमसे वो छीन लेगा. और ये अगर तुम्हें देखना है तो जाओ गुलाग, जो गुलाग्स में हुआ रशिया में, कि नहीं नहीं जी ये तो एंटी कम्युनिस्ट है, इसको बंद कर दो. किसी ने नहीं पूछा, बंद कर दिया. 25-25 साल निकाल दिए लोगों ने. कल तक वो थे ठेकेदार कम्युनिज्म के रशिया में, रेड रेवोल्यूशन के. अगले दिन वो गुलाग में थे. ये हिस्ट्री पढ़ो. मेजॉरिटी लोग जो इस चीज से कुछ भी, सिर्फ इतना करो, हिस्ट्री ऑफ ऑल अदर नेशंस दैट हैव बीन इन्वॉल्वड इन मेजर कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स एंड आइडेंटिटी स्ट्रगल पढ़ लो. तुम्हें रियलाइज कर लोगे कितने हिस्से आर सिमिलर. How history rhymes when it happens again. You will realize how many of these parts are similar and how careful you need to be such that they don't become that. This is not novel. The only unique problem India has, which is also something I wanted to bring when national security was, or India has a unique problem, which is this complete eruption of variety in identity. That is why the grand narratives are an important input. But besides that, our circumstance will definitely rhyme with historical circumstances around the world. It is not independent. This is not just India going through this. Iran tried this in the 80s. Israel tried this in like later 80s, 90s, whatever, after their wars. People have tried this. This has happened before. And we have to be very careful of that framework where things go in the wrong direction.
Yep, I agree. I try and understand this phenomenon that's happening in this country, and And I hope what we did today, the design of today's discussion was purposely made in a way that there are no definitive answers, but there are more exploratory movements. There are ways to look and try, challenge you. And if you are triggered by it, it's okay. If you're made to think more, I'm happy. But try and understand this. For me, if your nationalism is that India's territorial integrity is sacrosanct, I'm with you. If your nationalism is that people calling for violence against the state and blowing Indians up and corners of India up, I'm with you. But if your nationalism is about cheap antics, bullying people, going out and trying to bully someone because they don't agree with your peacocking when it comes to showing love for the nation. I mean,
Peacocking is a brilliant word there.
that's all it is.
Yes.
At an evolutionary level, we are all peacocking. And you know, मैं तेरे को एक लास्ट एग्जांपल दूंगा सबको. इंडिया में ना जो सो कॉल्ड नॉन लेफ्ट राइट विंग है ना, वो हमेशा लेफ्ट को बड़ा ये करता है, बिकॉज लेफ्ट में एक बड़ी विचित्र सी आदत है. वो क्या करेंगे हाल में, वो बोलेंगे मैंने देख ये किया. वी आर ऑल पीकॉकिंग and they will all call it virtue signaling. The left virtue signals. I'm not saying the left doesn't virtue signal, but then I was like, one day I asked them, I was like, you know what, how you virtue signal and peacock on social media? And it's going to piss a lot of people off because I'm going to end it with this. When you show that ऐसे हाथ रख के flag के आगे, that is also peacocking.
और क्या?
I'm not saying you genuinely don't love it.
हाँ.
You do.
हाँ.
The leftist also loves when they play their oppression card and their oppression Olympics. They genuinely love it. Similarly, you are also peacocking. Everybody virtue signals, my friend. When you take that photo and you put it on social media that you fed a gau mata. I also feed gau mata, by the way. मैं भी करता हूं. हम सब करते हैं. हमारी पीकॉकिंग अलग अलग स्टाइल की होती है. हाँ, अगर आपका ये डिबेट है कि मेरी पीकॉकिंग इज बेटर देन द लेफ्ट विंग पीकॉकिंग, वो एक सेपरेट डिबेट है. मगर ये मत बोलना कि आप पीकॉक नहीं करते हो. एवरीबडी इज पीकॉकिंग. एवरीबडी इज.
कैसे नहीं होगा कुशल भाई? सोशल मीडिया गेम अटेंशन का है, पीकॉकिंग का पर्पस अटेंशन है. दोस आर 1:1 कोरिलेट्स. वो तो होना ही होना है. हम एज क्रिएटर्स हमारा काम ही है आगे खड़े होना लाइन में. अब वो लाइन में आगे कैसे खड़े होगा? पीकॉकिंग करके खड़ा होगा आदमी, और कैसे होगा? देखेंगे कैसे लोग उसे?
एग्जैक्टली. और हम सब करते हैं. मैं नहीं कह रहा हूं मैं नहीं करता हूं. प्रखर नहीं कह रहा है प्रखर नहीं करता है. मगर हम में इतनी ऑनेस्टी है कि हम बोल रहे हैं. मगर हम साथ में ये भी कह रहे हैं कि हम हमारी पीकॉकिंग आप पर इंपोज नहीं करना चाहते थ्रू द लॉ. आप अपनी पीकॉकिंग हम पर इंपोज नहीं करो थ्रू द लॉ. द लाइन इज वेरी क्लियर. Outside of the territorial integrity of India and the safety of Indian citizens, where you actually do an act of terrorism, बस कर दो बाकी सब. जीने दो लोगों को. और उस रेट पे हम लोग आज की डिस्कशन को एंड करेंगे. प्रखर, थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर कमिंग.
नहीं, this has been an absolute pleasure. I felt so out of depth. I tried my best. Hopefully I was decent. Thank you.
नहीं, तूने अच्छा काम किया. तू अच्छा काम कर रहा है. सो गाइज, बिफोर वी रैप थिंग्स अप, इन द डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ द पॉडकास्ट मैंने प्रखर की बुक की वेबसाइट और द आर्ट ऑफ कॉन्वर्सेशन, दूसरी जो वेबसाइट है प्रखर की, दोनों का लिंक रखा हुआ है. गो एंड चेक इट आउट. सपोर्ट हिम. Also, I've put the link of Prakhar's YouTube channel, Prakhar के प्रवचन. जाके सुनो प्रखर के प्रवचन. और as far as I'm concerned, you know the drill. लाइक द वीडियो, कमेंट छोड़ो, गालियां लिखो नीचे, एंटी नेशनल कुशल मेहरा. उससे यूट्यूब का एल्गोरिथम को बहुत फर्क पड़ता है. और यू नो, सब्सक्राइब करो चैनल को, या मेंबर बनो यूट्यूब में, या पेट्रियन पे करो, या मर्च खरीदो. ये देखो, आज मैंने टी शर्ट पहनी है. आउटरीच की दुकान, तुम लोग सब लोग वही हो. आउटरीच की दुकान हो सबके सब. जाके टी शर्ट खरीद लो आउटरीच की दुकान की. यहाँ यूपीआई है. आई विल सी यू गाइस नेक्स्ट टाइम. अंटिल देन, टेक केयर. टाटा, बाय बाय.